Hello, and welcome to this Inspire session, analytic automation that helped accelerate the delivery of unemployment benefits during COVID. My name is Andy McIsaac, Solutions Marketing Director for the public sector here at Alteryx. What happens when a large transactional system that is scoped to manage around 2,000 applications a month suddenly faces an influx of over 2 million in a short amount of time? Well, you quickly discover that your legacy system needs help. And in the face of the COVID pandemic, the state of Florida's unemployment agency found themselves facing such an overwhelming challenge. They had an inability to scale with the sheer volume of new applicants that were coming into the system. In a matter of days, a task force of state technology and data leaders worked to supplement their existing system with critical automation to handle the extreme influx of applications. Using a combination of Google Forms for data intake and analytics automation through Alteryx and RPA through UPI Path, the agency was able to restore access to this critical array of services and deliver benefits to those citizens of Florida who needed them. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Matthew McCarville, VP of Government and Education Data Strategy at MTX Consulting Group, and who was recently the Chief Data Officer for the state of Florida. Welcome, Matthew. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, I am most recently the Chief Data Officer for the entire state of Florida. We worked with all 40 or so state agencies, the 14 major state universities, and the state college system as well as the 67 counties. We did a lot of different things during that time, but we also bailed out the unemployment system when that came. My team was deployed to find creative solutions in order to rectify the situation that the unemployment system found itself in. So it was a very interesting time for all of us, and brought a lot of students and interns from my time as a college professor for about the last 10 years, teaching at different universities, including University of Florida. And having finished my doctorate this last year, having done a lot of research as well in the subject area. So it was a nice being able to apply a lot of the things that we all learned through different areas.
Yeah, I think everybody learned a lot because of COVID. So let's get into some questions, Matthew. Shortly within your tenure as CDO for the state of Florida, the state's unemployment system, that was designed to manage, a set number of applicants a month, around 2,000 or so. Suddenly you faced, this tsunami of applications coming because of unemployment issues there because of COVID. Can you kind of describe what happened and what were your initial thoughts?
Absolutely. So, like you said, the system was built about 15 years ago in a .NET base, and it had a front end, a middle layer, and a back end. And the system was never made for the kind of COVID response that happened in an unemployment crisis. What was a system made to handle, like you said, about 2,000 people a month? And it had a long time for processing, up to 4 weeks for people to be processed through many different layers of different queues that the system had built into the middle layer. Became an instantaneous response with 2 million people all applying for unemployment at the same time. The system crashed. We added 97 or so servers to the on-prem situation, but it still didn't fix the ability to process. So when the front end crashed, we had to really come up with some creative solutions, both in the front end user experience for citizens, as well as in the processing of those applications once they were actually collected from the citizens.
Yeah. Well, yeah, quite the challenge. So obviously you're faced with a system challenge, a technical challenge, a data challenge, but this is something that I would imagine also created a lot of challenges for the leadership in the state. What was some of what was kind of that pressure like? I mean, I'm sure this went all the way up to the highest chains of command there in the state.
Yeah, at that time, Secretary Jonathan Satter, who I reported to at the Department of Management Services, was brought in to help be able to really repair the situation that was happening. We brought in my team, the Chief Data Officer for the state of Florida, and my whole team. We brought in, there was a 30-person conference room full of people from all different state agencies in order to really triage the situation and solve it as much as we could as fast as possible. And it was a situation where we were working 7 days a week, 15, 16-hour days, uh, continuously for months in order to really try and solve that. We had some of the brightest minds in state government employees in that room.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, what were some of the immediate challenges that the task force was focused on, and how did the need to automate some of those important tasks come into play?
Well, when a system that usually has 2,000 people per month come in, and let's say 20% of those people or to 50% of those people are actually viable for being approved for state level unemployment, what you're looking at is a lot of different queues, appeals, arbitration, and collection, as well as gathering of missing information like social security numbers, W-4s, any income verification, employer verification, wage verification, working with the Department of Revenue. There's a lot of things that go into that entire process. What we quickly realized is we had to divert that processing into other systems as fast as possible. So my team worked on what started as Google Forms, actually, recreating the entire unemployment application. And then we also ended up diverting that in the future state while collecting information in Google Forms into a Google web application, which was sent into Google Sheets that we fed into Alteryx. So we had a lot of different things diverting off the typical traffic into the primary system into disparate cloud collections that we could then later bring back into the system at the right time to manage the traffic coming into the system. So we could actually control how many applications came in for processing so that the system didn't fail again.
Wow, yes. So, my understanding, and I know we've had a chance to talk a couple times previously on this, and there's a lot of different business functions that go into an unemployment system. Can you describe, some of the challenges that, around eligibility, around adjudication decisions, and even just how payments are dispersed in some of the challenges that the team faced addressing those issues?
Yeah, as you said, they're very complicated. Each one of those different systems have queues, have entire teams of people assigned to them, have processes that are entrenched in state government. What we had to do is a lot of identity verification. We had to do a lot of things in Alteryx on disparate data silo consolidation. We had to merge a lot of different data resources in together, whether that be call center data from multiple different vendors that responded to that crisis, and that came in totally different versions, different formats, merge those into a common way that we could actually get those into Tableau data visualizations and dashboards for the governor's office, for the PR that was happening every day, sometimes multiple times a day. We had to use a lot of different things that really circumvented the traditional processing of what people were used to and streamlined the processing down to what was minimally needed so that people could get their unemployment funds as fast as possible and be approved in situations where people were in dire need for that income.
Oh, now it seems like the approach that you're talking, you alluded to it a little bit. You utilize Google Forms and then a Google Web application, for some of the intake, and then you did some of the analytic process automation through Alteryx, and you mentioned Tableau for visualization. I understand you also use some RPA through UiPath. So, how did this all come together? How did you come up with this? I would describe almost like an agile tech stack to kind of address this problem.
Yeah, well, and that's definitely true. Well, we were told to come up with creative processes that the government had never thought of before in order to solve this problem. And we were given funds allocated in an emergency basis in order to get that done. So robotic processing automation with the vendor UiPath ended up being what we used because with 2 million applications to go through the typical processing time that people were used to, or that was the norm for those processes, would have taken us over 18 months and we would have had to hire several hundred people at a human resource cost exorbitant to the state. So what we ended up doing is building robotic process automation and feeding the data into those robotic processes, recreating those processes, essentially like a macros. into the back end of the system, re-optimizing and re-engineering business processes to ensure that artificial intelligence, automation, everything was inserted and human elements were taken out as minimal as possible in order to only have them involved when critical thinking or subjectiveness was inserted into a business process. Alteryx was key to that because we had to unite in multiple different data streams from SharePoint to Google to all sorts of different legacy systems that we were able to unite through Excel in different formats and integrate that into a common automated and scheduled feed into what we needed for the bots to run their processes sometimes many times a day.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot of stuff to pull together. Can you go into some more details on how analytic process automation was utilized to process and analyze the data and automate, like processes like identification, like through fuzzy matching and the determination of eligibility, to the management of funding distribution and the adjudication of claims?
Yeah, we did a lot of different things with Alteryx, so it's hard to think about all the different ways that we used it. In honesty, there, but the fuzzy matching, identity matching, and identity verification, using it for removing people incorrectly put into fraud, doing IP address matching, realizing that for the first time in history, many people were moving in with their parents, with friends. What became your physical address or your IP address that should be mapped to an individual computer was now being mapped to many different people that were applying from a single IP address. Multiple generations were often applying for unemployment. So we had to do a lot of differing engines. We had to do a lot of computations using Alteryx that were we had never thought we'd use Alteryx for. And it worked very well because what we built once and we built very well, we were able to recreate that using the automated business process workflows that we just scheduled to run. Once we knew it ran well and it did everything we needed, we were able to run that on a continual basis until the end of that backed up queue was solved.
Wow. So, obviously, a ton of people looking, for support, unprecedented numbers. We understand, there was some system access issues. People couldn't apply maybe right away. My understanding, though, that analytic process automation was used to help reduce the delay in the payment of claims, to help keep people whole, even if they applied for claims, many weeks after they first became eligible. Can you describe that approach and how Alteryx helped you guys tackle that issue?
Absolutely. Yeah. In the system, that's called backdating. So when the system crashed, there was about a 4 week period where it was just a black hole. People were sending in paper applications that got converted through a vendor into PDFs, into thousands and thousands. I mean, we had hundreds of thousands of PDFs. And we ended up having state employees working after hours in order to manually input those into the system, just like you would if you were externally applying. But we couldn't ask people to reapply once they'd sent in their paper application. So we had multiple streams of data moving into the system that we had to manage and ensure that they weren't duplicated, that we were actually using them efficiently, moving them through the system, but also making sure people were made whole, as you said. So if you applied a month earlier than when your application was actually submitted because you were number 400,000 in the queue and it took us that long to get to you actually submitting your application, we went with the original backdate of when you did originally apply for unemployment. And we used Alteryx to make sure that we were differing out those engines in order to ensure that those people were actually viably due for that backdated income through unemployment. Sometimes it was, by the time we got to their unemployment, sadly, many weeks. It was up to 10, 12 weeks sometimes, where people were having to have made whole checks in chunks to the time that they actually were separated from their employment. And Alteryx was key to moving all of those different data sources together and then getting that workflow really finely tuned so that we knew it was doing it the same way every time and that audit wise, everything was ready to go and everything would move forward.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, obviously, trying to keep the people whole and get them the support they need is most important. But there was a lot at stake here. Not only for the state, but for a large number of citizens. From your own personal perspective, can you describe some of the benefits or breakthroughs that the state saw, but also how you think that really worked to help serve the citizens of the state?
Yeah, I think we really re engineered the way government thought of processing and has been made famous in the news recently. The deployment of a new system is coming out in Florida, just like many other states. I worked with many other chief data officers from other states. Many of them were in the same boat, heavily congested cities and states that had high populations really got hit hard by COVID. And what they were doing is really re-engineering the way government worked. Those entrenched business processes that had been done for 20 years the same way couldn't be done in the future in that manner. So re-engineering business processes, optimizing them for automation, and then doing robotic processing automation, which is now an integral part to the unemployment process in the state of Florida, as well as many other states. It has been integral to really re-engineering the way that government thinks about how they process constituents and the constituent experience.
Oh, yeah, we are definitely seeing that this move towards more and more of the automation is absolutely key, especially in these large transactional systems. But what advice would you give to those, charged with, managing these large transactional systems like unemployment, maybe like, social services, um, and so forth? But maybe, they're questioning, the value of analytics automation. What advice would you give them?
So I would advise to take a step back first and really look at your business processes. So when we brought in robotic process automation, we actually thought that we would put bots on everything. We quickly found out that when we could do APIs, data movement, and automate workflows, Alteryx became about 80% of our automation strategy as a state. So when we moved forward with automation as a service, automation across the enterprise of the state, it became apparent that what we really needed to do was take a step back and look at our business processes as a state and really, one, document what are we doing now, but then two, how do we optimize or re-engineer that business process so we can integrate in as much automation as possible and take out any subjectivity in there until it was absolutely required at an end of a critical thinking business process. So it really allowed us to take a step back. What I would advise in any state or any public entity moving forward is really looking at how do we do business and then what platform serves us best as we move forward. It's not always, in a case of automation, something more complex. Sometimes the simple movement of automation of a business process workflow and APA can really solve many of the different problems across an enterprise.
Great, yeah, great advice there. So I know you're now working in the private sector, but you're the VP now of Government and Education Data Strategy at MTX Consulting. Um, so can you tell us, what you're focused on, and how you're still working with data and analytics, and what do you think is going to be important for the clients that you're working on as they're looking at analytics and data strategy?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's recently joined the MTX group, and what I'm really leading is a re-energization of how they look at using data as an asset across education and local and state government. And what we're doing with their subsidiary through it's called MavQ, Maverick Quantum, is their AI company that we're working with our partners in order to move forward in leveraging AI as a overlying ability to predict what is happening with your data assets as efficiently and operationally as possible moving forward. With things like Alteryx and APA, robotic process automation, as well as the application of efficient artificial intelligence, is going to be integral to the public sector moving forward because they are being told to do more with less. Budgets are getting tight, COVID restrictions and state responses from last year's budget cycle and the lack of income in many states' capacities has really brought in a lot of attention and increased restrictions on budgets as well as resources. They're buying a lot of retirees out. They're moving a lot of things around. There's a lot of things happening where analytics process automation, robotic process automation, and artificial intelligence, as well as just leveraging the data that enterprises are sitting on, has become one of the primary targets to enterprises being successful in the future, whether you're public or private. So there's a lot of things we're working on to really across the board leverage the data as an asset and then continually looking at that historical data and applying artificial intelligence so we can look towards the future at the most efficient manner.
Great, that's a great perspective. Um, So I just want to remind our audience to please join us for a short survey. Please fill that out. Let us know what you thought about this session. I wanted to take a moment and thank you, Matthew, for your tremendous perspective, for your service, in the public sectors, specifically to the citizens of Florida and helping them, get through the COVID crisis, and for the work you're going to continue to do to help state, local governments and education organizations leverage the power of data. So, any final words, Matthew?
No, I look forward to working with you, Andy, for more, working with Alteryx, and working with many of the different entities and public realms that are out there that are going to be watching this and looking towards this as advice for their future application.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Please enjoy the rest of your Inspire experience. Thank you very much.